Admiral Zextal stood before the curved window of their temporary Earth office, four-fingered hands clasped behind their back as they watched the sunset paint the sky in colors their compound eyes could barely process. The humans called this particular shade purple, a concept their species had no word for. It was just one of countless peculiarities they'd encountered since arriving on this puzzling world. The holoscreen behind them continued to replay the latest joint exercise footage, filling the room with the soft hum of simulated space combat. The Admiral's antennae twitched involuntarily as they watched, for the seventh time, a human cruiser execute a maneuver that should have been physically impossible for any crew to perform under real combat conditions. Yet there it was, recorded in perfect clarity. A Terran vessel dropping out of formation, cutting its primary engines mid-turn, and using the gravitational wake of its own support ships to slingshot into a firing position that left 3 unified fleet destroyers exposed. Computer, tactical analysis of human Commander Chen's maneuver, time index 4723. Zextal commanded, their translator rendering the clicks and chirps into standard Earth English, a courtesy for the surveillance systems they knew were monitoring their office. The AI's response was immediate. Maneuver success probability under standard combat conditions, 12.4%. Crew survival rate if failed, 31.7%. Note: tactical pattern matches 5 previous encounters with human vessels during peaceful exercises. Zextal's outer eyelids flickered in what their species considered a frown. The numbers made no sense. No rational commander would attempt a maneuver with such a low success rate, let alone make it a repeated tactic. Yet the humans did it consistently, and more bewildering still, they succeeded more often than not. The door chimed, interrupting their contemplation. Enter, they clicked, the translator smoothing their speech. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez strode in, her crisp United Earth Navy uniform a sharp contrast to Zextal's iridescent carapace. Admiral, I have your updated briefing for tomorrow's cultural investigation. Ah, yes, the mystery of human tactical training. Zextal turned from the window, their height allowing them to look down at the lieutenant from nearly 2 meters up. Tell me, Lieutenant, where did you learn your combat tactics? Martinez's lips curved into what humans called a smile, another gesture Zextal was still learning to interpret. Well, sir, formally at the academy, but honestly, my first space combat experience was probably Marathon on my dad's ancient gaming console when I was 6. The Admiral's translator took a full second to process the statement, suggesting multiple contextual inconsistencies. You engaged in combat simulations as a larval stage human. Martinez's laugh echoed through the office. We just call them children, sir. And yes, though we didn't think of them as simulations back then, they were just games. Zextal's antennae quivered with interest. This matched a pattern they'd begun to notice in conversations with other human officers. Their species waited until full mental maturity before exposing their young to any form of combat concepts, yet humans seemed to integrate complex tactical thinking into their offspring's earliest entertainment. Then tomorrow's facility inspection isn't exactly what you're expecting, sir, Martinez finished, but I think you'll find it illuminating. Just try to keep an open mind. The Admiral's outer mandibles clicked in what their species considered wry amusement. 5 years after first contact, and humans were still finding ways to surprise them. They turned back to the holoscreen, watching again as Commander Chen's ship performed its impossible dance through space. An open mind, Lieutenant, is precisely why I requested this assignment. Dismissed. As Martinez's footsteps faded down the hallway, Zextal reached out to touch the holoscreen, freezing the image on a perfect view of the human ship's trajectory. Their species had been sailing the stars for 3 centuries before humanity achieved faster-than-light travel. How had these newcomers already learned to make spacecraft move like they were born to the void? Tomorrow, perhaps, they would begin to understand. Admiral Zextal's hover transport glided to a stop before a building that seemed to be made entirely of light and sound. Their sensitive antennae picked up the thrumming bass of what humans called electronic music, while their compound eyes struggled to process the riot of holographic advertisements that danced across the structure's facade. Above the entrance, a massive projection showed starships engaged in elaborate combat maneuvers. "Lieutenant Martinez," Zextal clicked, their translator working overtime to convey their confusion. "I believe there has been an error. My briefing mentioned a tactical training facility." Martinez's expression carried that peculiar human hint of suppressed amusement. "This is Starspace Arcade, sir. The largest gaming center in New Singapore. And yes, it's exactly where we're supposed to be." Before Zextal could formulate a proper response, the transport's doors whispered open, letting in a wave of excited chatter and electronic beeping. Young humans of various ages streamed past their vehicle, many wearing shirts emblazoned with spacecraft designs or military insignias. "Shall we?" Martins gestured toward the entrance. The interior was even more overwhelming than the exterior. Rows of simulation pods lined the walls, their canopies opening and closing like mechanical flowers as humans climbed in and out. Some were standard upright models, while others were full gravitational rigs that could rotate in any direction. The air crackled with energy and enthusiasm. "Welcome to Starspace Arcade, where legends begin," a cheerful automated voice announced as they passed through the security scanner. "Today's special: double credits on all Fleet Commander challenges." Zextal's outer mandibles clicked rapidly, their species equivalent of clearing their throat. "Lieutenant, I fail to understand. These are entertainment devices. How does this relate to human military excellence in space combat?" Martinez led them past a group of teenagers arguing animatedly about shield harmonics. "Admiral, what do you see when you look around this room?" Zextal's compound eyes took in the scene. "I see juvenile humans engaging in recreational activities. I see simplified combat scenarios displayed on screens. I see..." They paused, something catching their attention. "I see a young human achieving a firing solution that would take our gunners 3 minutes to calculate, and they did it in seconds." "Exactly." Martin smiled. "We don't separate learning from play, Admiral. Every child here is absorbing complex spatial mathematics, gravitational physics, and battle tactics. They just think they're having fun." A small crowd had gathered around one of the premium simulation pods, their excited voices carrying across the arcade. Zextal found themselves drawn toward the commotion, their long strides carrying them smoothly through the throng of young humans. The pod's external display showed a remarkable scene: a small fleet of human vessels executing a perfect Pincer 7 formation, an advanced tactical pattern that had originated in the Unified Fleet's own academy. But there was something different about it. Something. "That's not regulation spacing," Zextal observed, their antennae twitching with sudden interest. "They've modified the formation to account for gravitational drift from the nearby asteroid field. Who is operating this simulation?" The crowd parted slightly, revealing a sight that made all 4 of Zextal's eyes widen simultaneously. A human child, barely tall enough to reach the pod's controls, stood on a booster platform with an expression of intense concentration. Her small fingers danced across the tactical interface with practiced precision. "Sir," Martinez said quietly, "I believe you'll want to watch this particular pilot for a while. Her name is Sarah Chen." "Chen." Zextal's translator crackled with surprise. "Any relation to Commander Chen from yesterday's exercise footage?" "His daughter." Martinez's smile widened. "And if you think what you're seeing now is impressive, just wait. She's only getting started." Zextal's antennae quivered with anticipation as they settled in to observe. Perhaps this strange facility would provide answers after all. Though they suspected those answers might only lead to even more intriguing questions. The young Chen's simulation pod stood apart from the others, its sleek black surface marked with subtle gold accents that indicated its premium status. But it wasn't the machine that held Admiral Zextal's attention. It was the methodical way the child approached her task. While other young humans rushed eagerly to their pods, Sarah Chen stood before hers, consulting a worn notebook covered in hand-drawn diagrams. Zextal's enhanced vision could make out the precise lines of spacecraft formations sketched in different colored inks, annotated with calculations that would look at home in any military academy. "How long has she been coming here?" Zextal asked, their translator barely catching the subtle clicks of curiosity in their voice. Martinez checked her datapad. According to the arcade's records, she got her first basic pilot's card 3 years ago. She was 7. The Admiral's antennae twitched. 7 cycles around your sun. That would make her 10 now. Yes. Martine smiled. She holds 12 of the top 20 scores on the advanced combat scenarios. The other 8 are held by active duty officers. The girl finally closed her notebook, tucking it carefully into a backpack adorned with patches from various space programs. She stepped onto the booster platform with practiced ease, her small frame dwarfed by the pod's control interface. But there was nothing childlike about the way she began her pre-simulation checks. "Computer," Sarah's clear voice carried across the space. "Load scenario Proxima Defense. Difficulty level 8. Several observers in the crowd gasped. Zextal's outer mandibles clicked rapidly. "Lieutenant, that scenario, isn't that based on the Battle of Proxima Centauri?" Martins nodded. "The same battle where her father earned his first command. Most adults can't clear it past level 5. The simulation hummed to life. On the external display, a massive fleet of enemy vessels emerged from hyperspace near Proxima Centauri. The scenario was famous, or infamous, for its impossible starting conditions. The defending fleet was outnumbered, outgunned, and caught in the star's gravitational field. Sarah's fingers moved across the controls with decisive precision. Her fleet split into 3 groups, but instead of following the standard defensive doctrine, she positioned them in a pattern Zextal had never seen before. "Fascinating," the Admiral murmured. "She's using the star's corona to mask her sensor signature. But at that range, the radiation would make targeting impossible." The girl's voice carried clearly through the pod's audio system, diverting power from weapons to sensors, calculating solar prominence patterns. Her small hands adjusted several controls simultaneously, compensating for gravitational lensing effect. Zextal's compound eyes widened as they realized what she was attempting. The enemy fleet, following standard tactical protocols, had formed up in a classic attack pattern, but they had positioned themselves between the defending fleet and a particularly active section of the star's surface. "She's not trying to target them directly," the Admiral clicked excitedly. "She's predicting where they'll be forced to move when the solar flare." The simulation erupted in a brilliant display of stellar physics. A massive solar flare, precisely timed and predicted, forced the enemy fleet to break formation. Sarah's vessels, already positioned for this exact moment, struck from 3 angles simultaneously. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds. Victory fanfare filled the arcade. The crowd burst into applause, but Sarah was already making notes in her notebook, apparently critiquing her own performance. "Lieutenant," Zextal said quietly, their translator struggling to convey their mix of awe and concern. "In my species, we have a saying, 'The quiet water cuts the deepest stone.' I believe I'm beginning to understand why your commanders think so differently from ours." Martinez watched as Sarah began configuring another scenario. "Sir, we train our tactical officers to follow proven doctrine, to respect the weight of centuries of space combat theory." The Admiral's antennae quivered thoughtfully. "But your species, you teach your children to play with it, to see it as a puzzle to be solved rather than a doctrine to be followed." Sarah's voice rang out again. "Computer, same scenario, difficulty level 9. Zextal settled in to watch. Clearly, they had much more to learn. Admiral Zextal had shifted to a better viewing position, their tall frame now casting a slight shadow over the small crowd gathered around Sarah Chen's simulation pod. The external displays showed a dazzling array of tactical data that the young human processed with remarkable speed. "Lieutenant," Zextal clicked softly, "explain something to me. In my species, we protect our young from the complexities of warfare until they reach maturity. Yet here I witness a child calculating kill zones and deployment vectors as if they were simple mathematics problems." Martinez considered this as they watched Sarah execute a perfect thatch weave maneuver, a defensive pattern that dated back to Earth's atmospheric combat era. "Sir, have you ever seen human children play tag?" The Admiral's translator took a moment to process the concept. "The pursuit game. Yes, I've observed it in the diplomatic quarter. A rather primitive exercise in predator-prey dynamics. Except it's not really," Martinez smiled. "It's teaching spatial awareness, strategic thinking, resource management, when to run, when to chase, how to manage your energy. We don't explicitly teach these things. Children learn them naturally through play." On the display, Sarah's fleet had encountered a new challenge. The simulation had thrown a quantum minefield into her path, a deadly obstacle that would shift position every time it was observed. Most commanders would plot a safe course around it. Sarah did something entirely different. "Computer," her clear voice rang out, "initiate Schrödinger Protocol Alpha." Zextal's antennae shot up in surprise. "That's impossible. She can't possibly understand quantum probability calculations at her age." But Sarah's fleet was already moving. Instead of avoiding the minefield, she sent her ships through it in a scattered formation. Each vessel adjusted its course based not on where the mines were, but on where they might be in the next quantum shift. "She's treating quantum uncertainty like a game of probability," Martinez explained. "Just like when children guess which hand holds a hidden coin. They don't need to understand wave function collapse to develop an intuition for it." The entire fleet emerged from the minefield unscathed. Sarah made a quick note in her notebook before proceeding with the mission. "Remarkable," Zextal clicked. "In our academies, we spend years teaching the philosophical and mathematical foundations before allowing students to attempt practical applications. But she just sees it as another puzzle to solve," Martinez finished. "That's the beauty of learning through play. There's no fear of failure, no preconceived notions of what's possible or impossible, just problems to solve and challenges to overcome." The simulation continued as Sarah's fleet approached their objective. The Admiral recognized the scenario now. It was a modified version of a famous battle from the Reichel campaign. The historical commander had achieved victory through a week-long war of attrition. Sarah solved it in 20 minutes. "Computer, scenario complete," the automated voice announced. "New efficiency record established." The young girl seemed unfazed by her achievement, already flipping through her notebook to a fresh page. Zextal noticed she had drawn a simple diagram of the quantum minefield, with probability vectors sketched in different colors. "Lieutenant," the Admiral clicked thoughtfully, "I believe I owe the Unified Fleet Command a significant update to our assessment of human military potential." "Oh." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Yes. We've been operating under the assumption that your species produces exceptional commanders through some form of advanced training program." Zextal's outer mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "The truth is far more concerning. You don't train them at all. You simply create an environment where becoming exceptional is inevitable." Sarah's voice interrupted their conversation. "Computer, increase difficulty to level 10. Enable random quantum anomalies." The Admiral settled back to observe, their antennae quivering with anticipation. "Tell me, Lieutenant, how many more of these gaming centers does your species maintain?" Martinez's smile widened. "Would you like the number for Earth, or for all human settled worlds?" 3 hours into their observation, Admiral Zextal had abandoned their usual rigid posture, leaning forward with all 4 eyes fixed intently on Sarah Chen's simulation pod. The girl had failed the current scenario 7 times now, each attempt lasting between 15 and 20 minutes. Yet instead of showing frustration, she appeared to grow more focused with each defeat. "There," Zextal clicked suddenly, pointing at the display. Watch her resource allocation pattern. It's evolving. Martinez nodded. She's learning from each failure. No, it's more than that. The Admiral's antennae twitched rapidly. She's intentionally failing in different ways to map the scenario's boundaries. In my species, such repeated failure would result in immediate removal from the training program. The simulation's artificial sun exploded again as Sarah's fleet failed to prevent a catastrophic chain reaction. Instead of sighing or showing disappointment, she quickly jotted something in her notebook before initiating another attempt. Computer, she commanded, replay previous attempt. Time index 4723 to 4815. Quarter speed. The display showed her fleet's final moments in slow motion. Sarah studied the footage with an intensity that reminded Zextal of veteran tactical officers analyzing battle recordings. Lieutenant, the Admiral clicked softly. What happens when she leaves this facility? Surely such dedicated training requires sacrifice of other developmental activities. Martinez smiled. After this, she has soccer practice, then homework, dinner with her family, and probably some time playing other games with friends online. Other games? Zextal's translator crackled with surprise. You mean to tell me this isn't her primary recreational activity? Oh no, sir. Sarah plays all sorts of games. Strategy games, physics puzzles, sports, each one teaching different skills in different ways. The Admiral's outer mandibles clicked rapidly as they processed this information. Your species has created an interlocking system of educational entertainment so comprehensive that your young don't even realize they're being trained. On the display, Sarah began her 8th attempt. This time, her fleet moved in a completely new formation, applying lessons learned from each previous failure. Sir, Martinez said, checking her datapad, would you like to know something interesting about this particular scenario? Go on. It's based on a real incident from the Proxima Centauri Defense Forces training program. Last year, they lost 3 ships attempting to prevent exactly this type of stellar chain reaction. The crews survived, but the exercise was deemed too dangerous to repeat. Zextal's antennae went rigid. You're telling me this child is practicing a scenario that trained military officers couldn't safely complete. The difference, Martinez explained, is that Sarah can fail as many times as she needs to without consequences. Each failure is just another data point, another piece of the puzzle. As if to emphasize this point, the simulation erupted in another catastrophic explosion. Sarah immediately began adjusting parameters for her 9th attempt. Fascinating, Zextal mused. In her mind, failure isn't failure at all. It's simply part of the learning process. Exactly. And watch this. I think she's figured something out. Sarah's fingers flew across the control panel with renewed purpose. Her fleet split into smaller groups than before, each taking position at precise coordinates around the unstable star. As radiation levels began to spike, her ships initiated a synchronized pulse from their shield generators. Impossible, Zextal clicked. She's creating a resonance pattern in the star's magnetic field, but the calculations required to synchronize multiple ships' shield harmonics. The artificial sun's surface churned and roiled, but this time, the chain reaction stabilized. The simulation's victory music played as success messages flashed across the screen. Sarah allowed herself a small smile before writing down her final notes. Then, to the Admiral's astonishment, she said, Computer, increase difficulty by 15% and restart scenario. Lieutenant, Zextal clicked quietly. I believe I need to completely reconsider everything we thought we knew about human military capabilities. Oh. Martinez raised an eyebrow. Why's that, sir? Because the Admiral's translator struggled to convey their mix of awe and concern. We've been preparing to face trained soldiers when we should have been preparing to face an entire species of natural-born tacticians. Admiral Zextal recognized the scenario the moment it appeared on the simulation pod's display. The distinctive arrangement of stellar bodies, the particular configuration of defensive satellites. This was the Kardashev Gambit, a tactical problem that had challenged the finest minds in the unified fleet for decades. "Lieutenant," they clicked urgently, "this simulation shouldn't be accessible at her clearance level. The complexity alone." "Sarah unlocked it last week," Martinez interrupted softly. "She's the first player to attempt it." The scenario was elegantly simple in theory, but devastatingly complex in execution. Protect a developing Type IO civilization as they completed their first Dyson swarm around a binary star system. The constructing ships were slow and vulnerable. The attacking forces were numerous and relentless, and the partially built megastructure created gravitational distortions that made conventional tactical doctrines useless. Sarah Chen stood motionless before the controls, her head tilted slightly as she studied the situation. Her notebook lay closed beside her. This was something entirely new. "In the Fleet Academy," Zextal commented, "students spend 3 months studying the theoretical principles before they're even allowed to attempt a solution." The girl's hands hovered over the control panel. The crowd around her pod had grown, drawn by the distinctive visuals of the legendary scenario. Several older players had their own tactical displays open, running analyses on their personal devices. "Look at her expression," Martins whispered. "She's not seeing this as a military problem at all." Sarah's fingers began to move. Instead of positioning her defensive fleet in any of the standard formations, she split them into dozens of tiny groups, far too small to be effective combat units. The observers murmured in confusion. "Interesting," Zextal clicked. "She's treating each ship as an independent actor rather than organizing them into tactical units. But the command and control requirements would be..." Sarah's voice interrupted their analysis. "Computer, enable emergent behavior protocols for all units. Set base parameters to match lunar defense swarm patterns." The Admiral's antennae shot up in surprise. "She's not commanding them at all. She's programming them to act like a defensive swarm." The simulation unfolded like nothing Zextal had ever seen. Sarah's tiny ship clusters responded to threats automatically, like antibodies reacting to an infection. When the enemy fleet arrived in force, they found themselves fighting not a defensive line but a complex adaptive system. "Of course," Martinez smiled. "She's playing it like Conway's Game of Life. Another human puzzle game. Each ship follows simple rules, but the overall pattern creates emergence." Zextal finished, their translator struggling with the concept. "She's matched the complexity of the megastructure's gravitational patterns with complexity in her defensive strategy." The enemy fleet's coherent attack formations began to break down as they tried to engage targets that refused to behave like traditional military units. Sarah's swarm flowed around them like water around rocks, finding weaknesses, exploiting gaps, always moving, never presenting a fixed target. "In all our analysis," the Admiral clicked softly, "we never considered this approach. We were too focused on solving it as a tactical exercise." But Sarah's generation grew up playing with swarm robotics toys and cellular automata simulations, Martinez explained. To her, this is just another pattern to play with. The simulation ended in victory. The Dyson swarm was completed. Sarah's defensive swarm had suffered losses, but the emergent nature of their behavior meant no single loss had compromised the overall strategy. The arcade erupted in applause. Several veteran players were already copying notes from their tactical displays, trying to understand what they'd just witnessed. Sarah simply reached for her notebook, drawing what looked like a simple flowchart of her swarm's behavioral rules. "Lieutenant," Zextal clicked, their outer mandibles trembling slightly. "I believe I now understand why your Commander Chen attempted that impossible maneuver in yesterday's exercise. Oh, because to him, and to his daughter, and perhaps to your entire species, nothing is impossible. It's all just patterns waiting to be played with." Sarah's voice rang out once more. "Computer, increase complexity of enemy attack patterns, and restart scenario." The Admiral settled in to watch, wondering how many other human children were out there, playfully rewriting the rules of warfare. Back in their temporary Earth office, Admiral Zextal sat before a holographic display, mandibles clicking softly as they composed their report to Fleet Command. The sunset painted familiar purple hues across the sky outside, but the Admiral's thoughts remained fixed on the scenes they had witnessed at the arcade. "Computer, begin recording," they clicked, their translator rendering their words into the formal diplomatic language of the unified fleet. Priority analysis, human military capabilities and training methodologies, security classification, maximum. The computer chirped acknowledgement as Zextal's antennae swayed thoughtfully. Traditional assessment metrics have failed to capture the true nature of human tactical development. We have been operating under a fundamental misconception that human space combat excellence derives from their training programs. The truth is far more profound and far more concerning. The Admiral pulled up footage from the arcade, specifically focusing on Sarah Chen's solution to the Kardashev Gambit. Alongside it, they displayed standard tactical doctrine from the Fleet Academy. Humans do not train their commanders, they cultivate them from earliest childhood through a comprehensive system of games. These are not mere simulations or simplified training exercises. They are complex, adaptive learning environments that encourage innovative thinking and unconventional solutions. Martinez's earlier words echoed in their mind. "We don't separate learning from play." "Consider the following statistics," Zextal continued, pulling up data from their observations. The average human child at facility designation, Starspace Arcade, attempts 47.3 unique tactical scenarios per hour. They experience failure in approximately 72% of these attempts. By age 12, a regular participant will have accumulated more tactical decision-making experience than a Fleet Academy graduate. The Admiral paused the recording, their outer eyelids flickering as they considered the implications. They added another data point. Critical observation. Human children show no adverse psychological response to tactical failure. Instead, they demonstrate increased engagement and determination with each unsuccessful attempt. This represents a fundamental psychological advantage over species that emphasize success and minimize failure exposure during development. The holographic display now showed a map of Earth, with points of light indicating the location of every gaming center. The planet glowed like a star, with thousands of brilliant pinpoints. We have grossly underestimated the scale of this phenomenon. What we observed is not an isolated training facility. It is one node in a vast network of entertainment centers, all continuously generating potential tactical innovations. Every human population center maintains multiple such facilities. Zextal's antennae twitched as they added a final observation. Most crucial finding. These centers are not designed as training facilities. They are genuine entertainment venues. Humans have transformed the most complex aspects of space warfare into a form of recreation. Their children master concepts through play that our academies struggle to teach through years of formal instruction. The Admiral stood, moving to the window to watch the last rays of purple fade from the sky. Their reflection in the glass showed all four eyes focused intently on the horizon. Strategic implications cannot be overstated. Every human child with access to these facilities is potentially developing into a tactical innovator. Their entire entertainment industry inadvertently serves as a distributed military research and development network, generating and testing new strategies through millions of simultaneous simulations. Zextal turned back to the recorder, their translator struggling to convey the gravity in their clicking. Recommendation: immediate revision of all human military potential assessments. We must abandon the assumption that their commanders are exceptionally gifted individuals. The truth is more remarkable. They are the predictable product of a culture that has turned warfare into play. The Admiral added a final note, their outer mandibles clicking in what might have been admiration or concern. Personal observation. In my species, we have a saying: to understand the warrior, study their training. But with humans, there is no training. There is only play. And in that simple difference lies a tactical advantage we cannot hope to match. End recording. Zextal clicked softly. Transmit to Fleet Command, maximum priority. As the computer confirmed the transmission, the Admiral's gaze returned to the now dark sky, wondering how the unified fleet would adapt to this new understanding of their human allies, or potential adversaries. 5 years after their visit to Starspace Arcade, Admiral Zextal stood on the observation deck of the Unified Fleet flagship, watching the latest joint exercise through their compound eyes. The massive view screen showed dozens of human and alien vessels maneuvering through an asteroid field, engaging in simulated combat under the light of a distant red dwarf star. "Admiral," their new aide clicked softly, "the human vessel Artemis is requesting permission to execute an unorthodox maneuver." Lieutenant Chen commanding. Zextal's antennae twitched with recognition. "Chen. Sarah Chen." "Yes, sir. Recently promoted. This is her first joint exercise as a command officer." The Admiral's outer mandibles clicked in what had become recognizable to their staff as amusement. "Permission granted." And Ensign, "Make sure all sensor arrays are recording at maximum resolution." The Artemis, a relatively small human cruiser, broke formation in a way that seemed almost familiar. Instead of maintaining traditional tactical positioning, it began moving through the asteroid field in patterns that appeared almost playful. "Sir," another officer reported, "the Artemis is broadcasting some kind of electromagnetic pulse pattern. It's not matching any known signal protocols." "No," Zextal clicked softly, "it wouldn't be. She's not sending signals, she's creating a resonance pattern." The asteroid field had been specifically chosen for this exercise because its dense formation made traditional combat maneuvers difficult. Most vessels were carefully picking their way through safe corridors, maintaining defensive positions. The Artemis, under Sarah Chen's command, was dancing. "Remarkable," one of the alien observers commented. "The human vessel appears to be deliberately attracting asteroid fragments with its shield harmonics." Zextal's antennae quivered with anticipation. Watch what happens next. The Artemis had gathered a small cloud of rotating debris around itself, like a miniature planetary ring system. When 3 unified fleet destroyers moved to engage it, Sarah's true strategy became apparent. Her ship's erratic movement pattern hadn't been random at all. She'd been calculating precisely how each asteroid fragment would respond to specific shield pulses. As the destroyers opened fire, the Artemis executed a complex series of turns that sent its debris cloud spiraling outward in 3 perfectly timed waves. The destroyer commanders, trained to track enemy vessel movements, found their targeting systems confused by the suddenly expanding cloud of electromagnetically charged asteroids. By the time they adjusted their sensors, the Artemis had slipped behind them, scoring killing shots on all 3 ships. "Impossible," one of the alien commanders sputtered. "The computational requirements for that level of debris control would be overwhelming," Zextal agreed, "if you approached it as a mathematical problem. But if you spent your childhood playing with gravitational fields in simulation pods." The Admiral's aide pulled up Lieutenant Chen's service record. "Sir, it says here she holds several gaming records at something called Starspace Arcade in New Singapore." "Indeed," Zextal's translator hummed with what might have been pride. "I was there when she set some of them." The exercise continued, but the Admiral's thoughts drifted back to that day in the arcade. They had witnessed the beginning of something remarkable, not just a talented child, but a validation of their entire report to Fleet Command. "Send my compliments to Lieutenant Chen," they clicked. "And append a personal note. The Kardashev Gambit sends its regards." On the view screen, the Artemis was already moving to its next engagement, its unconventional tactics spreading confusion through the carefully organized unified fleet formations. Several younger alien commanders had begun attempting to mimic her asteroid control technique, with varying degrees of success. "Sir," their aide clicked curiously, "is it true that after your report, the Fleet Command established its own gaming centers?" They tried. Zextal's outer mandibles clicked in amusement. "But they made the same mistake we all did at first. They approached it as a training program rather than entertainment. They forgot the most important ingredient." "Which was?" The Admiral watched as the Artemis executed another impossible maneuver, one that seemed to ignore everything they'd ever taught about proper space combat doctrine. Joy. They clicked simply. They forgot the joy of play.